The night settled like dust over a forgotten grave. The forest floor felt like it was covering something. Each root twisted like it was trying to say no. They let me live. That's what keeps my hands trembling 3 decades later. Not the guttural howls that cracked the silence like a rib. Not the footprint sunk so deep into the earth it left the mud weeping. Not even the moment I saw her, 8 feet tall, cradling something smaller against her chest as her eyes locked onto mine in the darkness of that cave. It's the choice they made. They let me go. I wasn't saved by my revolver, or by the skills I honed through years of sleeping under bitter skies and reading maps like sacred texts. I walked away because something with power, memory, and intent chose to let me walk. And now I carry that knowledge like a brand under my skin. Back then, I believed wilderness survival was about control, a kind of respectful dominance over the natural world. I modeled everything after Shackleton, learned how to find north in a snowblind gale, how to sleep in -40 wind, how to gut a trout with frozen fingers. I thought endurance was enough, that if I prepared well, nothing could truly surprise me. So in October of 1992, I set out on what I believed would be my greatest test. 7 days alone in one of the most secluded stretches of the Appalachian Mountains, Monongahela National Forest. No signals, no roads, no backup plan. Just me and the silence. I parked where the dirt thinned out into moss. 40 miles from any help. I double-checked my maps, laminated against rain. A compass older than I was. Enough rations to keep a soldier fed. A sleeping bag that could handle a northern winter, and a .357 Magnum that never left my hip. Day 1 felt like every other journey into the wild. The trees dressed in fire and gold. Sunlight dripping through like warm syrup. Squirrels rattled the branches above me. Birds stitched their voices into the breeze. A woodpecker drummed somewhere just out of view. The air tasted sharp but clean. I moved easily like I belonged. I made camp next to a cold stream and built my fire like I always did. Stone ringed, dry fuel, small flame. Simple dinner. Simple silence. The night played its normal music. Owls taking roll call, wind flirting with the treetops. A fox scream in the distance sharp enough to split sleep. Nothing strange. Not yet. But morning brought quiet. Not the calm, patient kind of quiet, but the type that presses itself into your eardrums and holds there, thick and expectant. No birds, no rustle. Even the water in the stream felt like it was flowing under breath. I stood still for a long time, my hand brushing the grip of my sidearm without thinking. I knew this kind of silence. Something big was nearby, maybe a bear, maybe a mountain lion, but I saw nothing. Not a shadow, not a track. I moved on, but the stillness followed me like a scent. By noon, it was unbearable. The trail offered nothing, no birds, no deer, no insects even. I started to feel like I was walking through a painting rather than a forest. Everything looked alive, but it wasn't living. Then I saw the print, down by a bend in the stream, half hidden in soft mud. 18 inches long, 8 inches across. Human in shape, but not human. Each toe pressed clean and deep, the spacing too wide, the arch too severe. The heel sunk further than my boot print ever could. I crouched, touched the edge. Still damp, still fresh. Something barefoot had passed here. Something massive and deliberate. I followed the prints as long as they lasted, until the ground hardened and the forest swallowed the rest. But even then, I kept noticing things. Branches broken at impossible heights. Thick limbs snapped clean like celery. No claw marks, no bark torn, just breakage. It didn't feel like an animal looking for food. It felt like a warning. That night I camped with one eye open. Built a larger fire. Kept the revolver beside me, not just within reach on me. I didn't sleep. Around midnight, the fire flickered like it sensed something, and when I turned my head toward the tree line, it was there, tall, still, watching. I couldn't make out the eyes, but I could feel them. Heavy, rooted, like they weren't just looking at me, they were looking through me. Measuring, deciding. I didn't breathe, didn't twitch, just kept my hand on the weapon, praying I wouldn't have to pull the trigger on something I didn't understand. Then it was gone. No sound, no footstep, just gone. I fed the fire until dawn. Day 4 arrived with dark clouds rolling low over the ridges like they wanted to erase the mountains altogether. The wind turned bitter. The trees leaned in like they were listening. A storm was coming, and in the mountains that meant one thing: shelter fast. That's how I found the cave, hidden behind a mess of brush and loose stone. Invisible unless you were practically in it already. I should have been more cautious. I should have listened to the itch rising in my chest. But the thunder was already echoing down the valley like rolling cannon fire, and I had no time left. I called out. No echo answered. No movement. I stepped inside. It wasn't a cave. Not really. The walls were shaped, stacked. Shelves carved into stone. The air smelled old but not stale. Something had been living here. Recently, drawings smeared and primitive marked the walls. Figures with long limbs, towering shapes chasing elk and deer. But the strangest ones showed something else. Something that looked like it didn't belong with the others. Not quite animal. Not quite man. I backed away, flashlight trembling in my hand. The deeper I looked, the more I saw. Bones, bedding, scattered nuts. A life lived here. A home. Then I heard it. A sound too low for language. Like stone grinding beneath the earth. And then, a silhouette in the entrance. 8 feet of muscle and thick dark fur. Not a beast. A mother. She was holding a child against her chest. And I was in her den. That was the moment I understood. I didn't belong here. Not in this cave. Not in this forest. Not in their world. And they had just reminded me why. She didn't roar right away. The mother stood at the entrance like a statue carved from rage. Her eyes flickered in the shadows, not wild, not blind with instinct, but aware. She saw me. She saw her child in her arms. And in a single blink, I became a calculation in her mind. Danger, intruder, problem. The next sound she made wasn't a scream. It was deeper, like the sound old trees make when they finally crack under their own weight. Not meant to scare me, meant to move me. I did the only thing I could. I ran. I threw my shoulder toward the sliver of space between her and the cave wall. A desperate blind maneuver. Her arm lashed out and claws the size of steak knives shredded the back of my pack like it was wet paper. I didn't feel the impact until later. Adrenaline drowned out the pain. And then, I was outside. The storm had arrived with a fury that felt personal. Rain slammed into the ground like it hated the earth. Thunder cracked open the sky in sharp, crooked lines. The forest was a blur of motion and light and sound. But all I could feel was the weight of something behind me. She was coming, not to chase. To end. I crashed into the woods. My revolver thumped against my hip, useless in my hand. The branches lashed my face. My boots slipped over roots. I ran like an animal with no name. And behind me, something large. Something fast. She didn't howl again. There was no triumphant roar, no cry to the sky. Just the sound of trees bending. Of ground being punished with every step. I didn't know how long I ran. The storm blurred time. Water soaked through every seam of my gear. The cold began to sink in. Eventually, I collapsed beneath a cluster of old-growth oak. Their massive trunks swayed above me like old gods deciding whether to shelter or smite. The storm began to pass, but the real danger had only crouched lower into the shadows. I was lost. Fully, completely lost. No path, no reference. The storm had spun me around like a coin, and she wasn't alone. I heard the second one before I saw him. He moved with less urgency but more weight. Every step was deliberate, measured. I ducked low. Instinct said hide, not fight, but the woods offered no cover. The trees were too slender, the underbrush too wet and thin. Then I saw it, a hollow in a centuries-old oak. Rot had chewed away a mouth in its side, just enough room for me to slide in sideways. Before crawling in, I did something I'd only read about in old tribal accounts. I covered myself in mud. Handfuls of cold, rancid leaves and soil smeared over my arms, my face, my neck. I smelled like rot, like the forest floor itself, and I prayed it would be enough. Inside the hollow, I couldn't sit upright. I couldn't breathe without feeling bark press back, but I stayed still. I watched. And then, he arrived. Not the mother. This one was bigger, 10 feet at least. His silhouette didn't sway like an animal's. It loomed. He walked like a sentry. His face, I only saw pieces and flickers of moonlight breaking through the storm clouds. It was wrong. Not monstrous, not twisted, but close enough to us that my brain didn't know whether to feel terror or recognition. He sniffed the air. I froze harder.
He turned toward me.
I could see his chest rise as he inhaled, but he didn't move closer. Instead, he looked past me, turned slowly, and moved off with the same unnatural grace. But I knew. He had seen me. Not with his eyes, with something else. They weren't just hunting me. They were watching me. evaluating. For hours I stayed in that tree, stiff-soaked, shaking, afraid that one creak of bark or one breath too loud would bring them back. Eventually, dawn filtered through the canopy, gray and lifeless, like light drained of all color. I emerged slowly, as if leaving the hollow might snap some invisible wire and trigger an alarm. No sound, no tracks, no sign of movement, but something had changed. From that moment forward, I stopped thinking about survival as an act of skill. It had become an act of diplomacy. I was inside someone else's borders, and the penalty for overstaying had become obvious. I moved during daylight. I chose my routes like a fugitive. I crossed rivers downstream from where I drank. I stopped building fires. I wanted them to know I was leaving. I wanted them to believe I understood. The silence stayed with me. Birds still refused to sing. Squirrels didn't chatter. The entire forest was holding its voice hostage, because something older was in control now. I stopped thinking in terms of Bigfoot or cryptid or myth. Those are words people use to keep the truth small enough to laugh at. This wasn't small. It wasn't a joke. It was a hidden civilization, living behind the trees we thought we knew. And I had been seen, judged, spared. I didn't know if the next night would bring the same mercy. But I knew one thing for certain. I could no longer pretend I was alone out here. When the fog rose that morning, it didn't feel like weather. It felt like the forest exhaling in warning. Thin veils of mist drifted low across the undergrowth, clinging to the trees, curling around my ankles like it was trying to feel what I was. And in that silence, thicker than anything I'd known before, my own breath started to sound foreign. Too loud, too human. I moved slowly now. Not like a hiker, not like a survivalist. Like someone crawling through a museum that didn't allow touching or speaking. The earth was softer underfoot. So I stayed to the rocks, and I started counting my steps. Not to measure distance, but to prove I was still in control of something. That's when I noticed it again. The prints. Not many this time, just one or two in the deeper moss between roots. But they were recent. Edges crisp, no rain damage, no debris blown in. And then, beside one, something else. A mark, scratched into the bark of a fallen tree. Not clawed, not random. Etched. It looked almost like a letter, but not from any language I knew. Just 4 straight lines and a curve. Precise, deliberate. I wasn't looking at the signs of an animal. I was looking at symbols. I kept walking, head low, not in submission but in caution. Every now and then I'd stop, not because I heard something, but because I didn't. No wind, no birds, just the sound of blood pulsing in my ears and the occasional creak of a distant limb settling under unseen weight. Then around midday I stumbled into a clearing. And I froze. It wasn't empty. In the center stood a structure, massive and silent. A dwelling, but not a human one. Logs stripped of bark, stacked and cross-woven like an enormous nest. It was both crude and impossibly intelligent. Built for shelter, for concealment, maybe even ritual. The roof was made from interlaced branches and what looked like woven grass, hardened by time and mud. It wasn't abandoned. Steam rose faintly from one corner like something had just cooked or moved. And just beyond the edge of the clearing, hung in the crook of a tree, were bones. Not scattered. Hung, arranged. Skulls of deer, jawbones of smaller animals. Everyone pierced through and looped with braided vine, swinging gently like wind chimes made by something with a concept of reverence or warning. I stayed hidden in the underbrush, barely blinking. And then I saw him. The largest one yet. He stepped from the dwelling, dragging a piece of what looked like elk hide behind him. He was immense, not just tall, dense. His presence felt like gravity, like something the forest had to bend around. His hair was darker than the others, his posture straighter. And then he stopped, turned, and looked directly at me. I don't know how. I hadn't moved, I hadn't made a sound. I was behind cover, perfectly still. But he saw me, not like a deer catching scent, like a man looking another man in the eye. He didn't roar. He didn't advance. He just stared. And then something in his face shifted. The corners of his lips curled. Not quite a smile. More like recognition. Like I was expected. Or remembered. And then he did something I will never forget. He raised one arm, slowly. Brought a closed fist to his chest. Tapped it twice. A sound thudded through the woods like a drum made of meat and bone. Then he turned, walked back inside the dwelling, and vanished. That gesture, it wasn't threat. It wasn't surrender. It was a message. And somehow, without understanding the language, I knew exactly what it meant. You've seen enough. I stayed hidden for another hour. When I finally rose to leave, something in the dirt caught my eye. Tracks. Around me. All around me. Not his. Others. Barefoot, enormous, and recent. While I watched him, they had watched me. I had been surrounded. Again. And no one had moved to stop me. They were letting me go, not because they feared me, but because for some reason I was allowed. That realization cracked something open in me. I wasn't escaping. I was being released. The rest of the hike, if you can even call it that, was a blur. I moved fast, reckless, driven by something more than fear now. I didn't check the map anymore, didn't care about food or blisters or rest. I just kept moving toward the feel of distance. And then, like a mirage after days of nightmare, I saw it. Metal. My truck. Untouched, unmoved, waiting. I nearly collapsed getting to it. When the door finally shut behind me, it was like entering another reality. The engine's growl felt safe. Human. Stupidly human. I drove without stopping until I hit pavement. Until I saw power lines again. And I cried when I did. Not because I was safe, but because I knew the truth now. The road out of the forest should have been a return to safety. But what no one tells you is, when you've seen something you were never meant to see, the world you return to isn't the same. Everything feels wrong. The gas station lights were too bright. The cashier's voice was too loud. The smell of coffee made my stomach turn. Not because it was bad, but because it belonged to a world that no longer made sense. I bought a bottle of water with trembling hands. And as I stepped into the restroom to wash off the filth still clinging to my arms, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. What stared back at me wasn't just exhausted. It was hollowed out, eyes too wide, muscles locked in ways I couldn't relax. Dirt caked in the corners of my face, dried blood near my collarbone. I barely recognized myself. The man in that reflection had come back, but he wasn't home. I sat in the truck for a long time. Windows rolled up. No radio. Just silence. But it wasn't their silence. Not that heavy watching kind. This was the silence of disbelief. Of an empty parking lot under fluorescent lights. Of a man who realized that what he knew of the natural world was a lie. When I finally pulled out onto the highway, I drove west, not toward home. I didn't want to explain. Didn't want to answer questions. Didn't even want to hear my own story out loud, because to say it would be to break it open, to let the thing inside me out into the air, and I wasn't ready for that. I spent the next 2 weeks in a small motel off Route 33. No phone calls. No news. No maps. I slept with the lights on. Even then, barely. And when I did sleep, I dreamed in pieces. Snippets of images. A massive hand pushing leaves aside. A dark face behind a screen of pine. The sound of a single deliberate breath just behind my left ear. But the worst dreams were the ones where nothing chased me. Nothing attacked. Instead, I'd dream of standing in the forest clearing. The largest one, broad, covered in dark hair, eyes like coal, standing across from me. And he'd just look. Not with hate, not even with curiosity, but with comprehension, like he knew me. And in those dreams, I never ran. I never had to. Because deep down, some part of me understood. I wasn't prey. I was being measured. Eventually, I tried going back to normal. Sort of. I returned to my cabin in Virginia. Not deep woods, just the outskirts. Civilized enough to pretend I was safe, but still close to trees. Too close. I locked the doors more often. Installed motion sensors. Got rid of all my wilderness gear. I didn't sell it. Didn't give it away. I burned it. One night, after weeks of insomnia, I carried my backpack, the one that had been shredded open in the cave, out to the fire pit. I stuffed it full of old maps, gear tags, even my sleeping bag, and I lit it. The flame crackled, hungry. It caught fast, like the gear wanted to disappear, and as the smoke rose into the night air, I half expected to hear something beyond the trees. A low breath. A footfall. The creak of a branch bending under too much weight. But nothing came, because they had already made their point. They didn't need to chase me anymore. I had been marked in a different way, and I carried it everywhere I went. I tried talking to someone once. A friend from my SAR days, search and rescue. A guy who'd seen some things himself, missing hikers, Unexplained disappearances. The kind of guy who didn't laugh at weird stories. So I told him a sanitized version. Left out the cave. Left out the baby. Just said I saw something in the woods. He got quiet. Then he said, "You know what scares me the most?" I waited. He didn't look at me when he said it. "It's not that people vanish," he said. "It's that sometimes we don't find anything, not bones, not gear, not even a broken branch." I nodded. He didn't ask me more. He didn't need to. Over the next year, I started collecting stories. Not publicly, not online, just quietly. Anytime I overheard a conversation at a diner, anytime I saw an article buried in the back pages of a local newspaper about a missing hunter, a camper who vanished near a ridge, unusual howling, unexplained footprints, I'd cut it out. Copy it, write it down. A few patterns began to emerge. Same regions, same time of year, early fall, usually October, always in deep undisturbed woods, and always the same signs. No animals, no birds, and silence that made your spine forget what stillness used to feel like. I wasn't alone. Others had brushed against them. Some never came back. Some came back changed, like me. But none of them, not one, had ever been inside the den. Not one had stood within spitting distance of a mother and child. Had been surrounded, watched, allowed to leave. That part was mine alone. And it wasn't a blessing. It was a burden. A question I'd never be able to answer. Why me? Why was I spared? Was it pity? Curiosity? Or was it something older? Something buried deep in their history? Had they seen someone like me before? Had they once been something closer to us? I'll never know, because I'll never go back. Even now, years later, I sometimes drive the edge of that region. I stop the truck, roll down the window, and I listen. If the birds are singing, I know I'm safe. But once, just once, there was nothing. No birds, no crickets, no wind. And I put the truck in reverse without even turning my head, because I knew what silence like that meant. They were near, and they were watching. Time didn't pass the same after that. Not in any real way. Sure, the clocks moved, the seasons changed, the world rolled forward, but inside something stayed frozen, like a single frame of film stuck between reels endlessly flickering in the back of my mind. I could work, I could hold conversations, I even dated someone for a while, but it always came back. I'd be walking through the grocery store standing in line, and I'd suddenly feel it again. The weight of their eyes. Not a memory, a sensation, as if somehow they never really let me go, like they had carved a notch into me, a scar that didn't show on the outside, but that marked me all the same. And sometimes I swear I'd catch something out of the corner of my eye, a shape too tall to be a person, a shadow that moved when nothing should have moved, a glimpse in the side mirror while driving through wooded roads at dusk. But every time I turned, it was gone. Still, I knew. The way you know when someone's behind you, even if you haven't heard a sound. It wasn't just paranoia. It was connection. One I never asked for, one I didn't want. And yet part of me, shameful as it is to admit, wondered if they were checking in. Making sure I kept quiet, or maybe making sure I remembered. And I did. Every damn detail. A year passed. Then 2. Then 5. I told myself I was healed. That I'd left it behind. But something shifted again in the fall of 1997. I had started hiking local trails again. Not deep wilderness, just safe, popular ones. Tame. Sanitized. But even that was a mistake. One afternoon in October, I hiked a ridge trail near the Blue Ridge Parkway. There were other hikers that day, families, kids, couples, and that made me feel safe, like I had re-entered the normal world of nature. And for a while, I believed it. The trail curved up to a scenic overlook, a view of the valley below, lit gold with the changing leaves. As I stood there, hands in pockets, eyes on the horizon, I felt it again. Not fear, not danger, but a presence. Low, heavy, watching. I turned slowly, and about 30 yards into the tree line, standing just behind a thin veil of undergrowth, was a man, or what looked like one. He wasn't dressed for hiking. No backpack, no visible gear. He just stood there, arms at his side, posture loose, and he was looking right at me. Not at the crowd, not at the overlook. Me. His skin was pale, almost gray with dirt. His hair long and tangled. His eyes, black, unreadable, but still none too knowing. And just for a second, I thought I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. Not a smile. Something else. Recognition. Then I blinked, and he was gone. No footstep, no rustle. Just gone. I scanned the woods, waited. Nothing. The families around me kept talking, laughing, taking pictures, oblivious. But I knew. It wasn't one of them. It was one of theirs. Smaller, thinner, human-shaped, but not human. Maybe a scout, maybe a test, maybe just a message. We still see you. I left the mountain that day and didn't return. I began reading obsessively. Not books from stores, not documentaries. Old things. Forest Service reports buried in archives. Native American oral histories. Handwritten journals passed between rangers. Internet forums lost in the corners of the early web, written by men who used fake names and spoken riddles. Patterns emerged. They always do when you're willing to see them. Sightings spiked around the same places I had marked. Always near water, always in deep forest, and always the same descriptions even across generations. Not just the creatures themselves, but the silence, the unnatural absence of sound. The birds that vanished, the bugs that stilled, the forest that withheld itself. That's how you know you're in their space. Not because you see them, because everything else disappears. Some reports mentioned small structures, piles of bones, marks in trees. But one in particular stayed with me. It was a handwritten account from a park volunteer in 1974. She had been cataloging tree species when she discovered what she called a woven altar, deep in a ravine. Stacked bones, arranged twigs, and what she described as hair not from any native animal, wrapped around the center post. She left it undisturbed, returned with rangers the next day. It was gone. Not destroyed, gone, as if it had never been there at all. She never returned to the woods again. Her final line read, "I wasn't supposed to see it, and it let me go." That chilled me to the core, because it was exactly how I felt, like I had been handed a secret that didn't belong to me, one that came with no instructions, just consequences. I started writing down my own account, not to share, just to release it, like bleeding out poison through ink. But every time I got close to finishing, I stopped, not because I doubted myself, but because I didn't want the story to become real. Because if I wrote the ending, I'd have to admit the truth. There is no ending. They're still out there. They always have been. And they remember. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't run that night in the cave. If I had stood still. If I had dropped the revolver and raised my hands. Would she have spared me anyway? Would she have shown me more? Or was I always going to be pushed out? Only permitted to glimpse the veil before it snapped shut again. And maybe that's worse. Because now I live with questions that eat through sleep like termites through old wood. What else is out there? Do they move? Are there more? Do they have language? Tradition? Memory? Do they bury their dead? Or do they vanish into mist like the dreams that follow me? Maybe I was chosen. Or maybe I was discarded, like a stone too dull to shape. But deep down, I don't think I escaped anything. I think I was tagged. Marked. Like a researcher might do with an animal they're studying. Track it, watch it, let it live, but always know where it is. And what if, one day, they come to collect? It's strange what the human mind does when it's seen too much. Some people repress it, lock it in a box and hide it so deep it starts to feel like fiction. Others obsess, chasing the shape of what they saw, trying to explain it, control it, drag it into the realm of reason. I did both. I denied it. I studied it. I built walls around it, and then carved windows into them, just to stare at the truth from a distance. And still, 33 years later, it never left me. Because the truth is, there's no escaping something that rewrites your instincts. You can't run from what your nervous system now recognizes. You can't forget the shape of a mother's rage echoing through a cave, or the way a 10-foot creature stared through you like glass. I could smell pine needles and remember the way the forest went silent. I could hear a twig snap in a city park and feel the weight of their presence. Like a hand pressing between my shoulder blades, I became two people, the man the world saw, and the one who never came out of that forest. He's still there, in that cave, on the ground. Inches from something older than language, locked in a moment that never stops breathing beneath the skin of memory. I aged, life moved forward, but something inside me didn't. I lived further from the wilderness, moved out of the woods, traded silence for streetlights, but none of it made a difference. I saw them in dreams, in reflections, in shapes just beyond reach. And then the dreams began to change. They weren't just fragments of fear anymore. They started to feel like invitations, not nightmares, messages, and in them I'd be back in the cave. No storm, no panic, just stillness. She would be there again, the mother, but older now, or maybe just calmer. And beside her, the child, no longer an infant, now taller than me, stronger, a presence. And it looked at me not with hate, not with curiosity, but with something deeper, recognition. Like it had been told, like it remembered, like I had become part of their story the same way they had etched themselves into mine. I'd wake up soaked in sweat, lungs burning, and the thought would hit me like a hammer. They didn't just let me go, they sent me back. To carry it, to keep it quiet, to see how long I'd last before speaking it aloud, not as a warning, as a signal, a whisper sent out into the world. Remember who owns the dark places. I began collecting stories, quietly, clipped articles, ranger reports, scattered testimonies buried in old forums and handwritten notes. All of them described the same things. Disappearances without a trace, campsites found abandoned, bones rearranged, always near water, always in places maps refused to name, and always the same silence, that unnatural vacuum where even the birds don't dare breathe. I found a journal from 1974, a park volunteer who wrote about discovering a woven altar of bones and hair in a ravine. When she returned the next day with rangers, it was gone. Not damaged, gone. Her final sentence was burned into the paper like a curse. I wasn't supposed to see it. And it let me go. I read that line over and over until I could hear it in her voice. Because that's exactly what happened to me. I wasn't rescued. I was released. And it changed everything. It infected the way I see the world. When you've been that close to something beyond explanation, you stop believing in randomness. You start seeing design in the shadows. Every broken branch, every strange noise, every missing hiker in the fall, it's not coincidence. It's consequence. I haven't told anyone this. Not really. Not like this. Not even my wife. She thinks I stopped hiking because of age. Thinks I let go of my gear because I outgrew it. But how do you explain that you gave up the woods because you finally understood what was waiting in them? That you stopped lighting fires not because you forgot how, but because you realized fire draws? Eyes that remember the last time they saw it? I tried writing it down. A few times. Tried sealing it in ink just to get it out of my bloodstream. But every time I came close, I felt it again, that pressure. Like the trees were listening. Like he was still watching. So I stopped, until now. And still, I wonder, what would have happened if I had stayed in that cave? If I hadn't run? If I had just lowered my weapon and stood there? Would she have killed me anyway? Or would I have seen something no one else alive ever has? Was that child meant to see me? Was I meant to see it? What if they remember more than we think? What if they pass down the memory of us? Stories whispered in guttural tones around underground fires. The tale of the man who wandered too far, saw too much and was spared. Not because he deserved mercy, but because they needed someone to remember. And I do. I remember everything. The mud, the blood, the black eyes behind the leaves, the sound of wood breaking like bone in the dark, the silence that felt like a presence pressing into the marrow of the earth. I remember the feeling that I had crossed a line, not just a boundary, but a threshold, one that separates the world we think we live in from the one that has always lived alongside us. And now that I've crossed it, I can never go back. So if you're hearing this, if you're someone who dreams of solitude, who imagines vanishing into the wild and finding freedom in the silence, listen carefully. There are places that don't want to be known, that weren't carved for us, places that never asked to be named on a map. If you find one, if the wind goes still, if the birds go silent, if the woods begin to watch, leave. Don't run, don't shout. Just leave, because once you're seen, you're known. And once you're known, you don't belong to yourself anymore. You belong to them. And they remember. Not all who vanish are lost. Some are taken. And some are sent back, like seeds buried under the skin of civilization, waiting to bloom into memory. I was one of them. I was allowed to return. But every day since, I've lived knowing that I didn't survive because of skill or luck. I survived because something out there, something ancient, chose to let me walk away. And I don't know why. I just know that someday someone else will go where I went. And this time they might not come back at all. The wilderness isn't empty, it never was.